the IEBC tonight, its constitution, and what it can and cannot do as is currently constituted. I am with lawyer Nick Biketi here in the Nairobi studios, and Professor Maurice Amutabi is with us from our Eldoret studios. And I just want to come to you, Professor Amutabi, and there seems to be a lot of politics around the reconstitution of the IEBC, but some are asking, why can we not use that special selection panel that was formed and constituted this current commission, as it was a panel that was, constituted, bringing many parties from religious groups to bipartisan political groups?
Thank you, Sharon, for that question. If you look at the history of electoral bodies in this country, it's almost like every election cycle, you have a new commission in place. And I think there are two reasons why that is the case. Usually is that if it operates well, like the previous ones we have seen, it's given a benefit of the doubt to do the next election. But usually, like you saw Isaac Hassan and others heading bodies such as that, is that there's a bad blood that develops among the commissioners. We saw this develop previously, and you have seen this now in this Chebukati commission. IEBC is a very important organization in this country because it's supposed to be an arbiter, it's supposed to be treated in elections and all that. And if there's no confidence within the Kenyan populace in the operations of the IEBC, then I think it just behooves those in IEBC to allow the process to take place in order to create a new organization that will preside over elections. If you look at the resignation of Commissioner Kombe, and then the recent resignation by Ambassador Dr. Paul Kurgat and the other two, it leaves us with doubts about the efficacy, the efficacy or the efficiency of IEBC, because the four commissioners have raised the eyebrows. They have raised issues that are very, very important. They have raised issues that are critical. They have raised issues that have left no doubt in the minds of many Kenyans that IEBC, as considered right now, cannot be relied upon to preside over a fair and just election.
Right.
So I think what needs to be done, and I think this is what many Kenyans are seeing, is that Chebukati can negotiate his way out with the two remaining commissioners so that we have a new clean slate that will organize elections for 2022. And I think it's not asking too much to point out the precedents that have occurred before, and that if 4 commissioners have resigned, and 3 of you are holding forth, and you know that you cannot hold a panel, you cannot hold a significant decision-making process, it just makes sense. It's logical for you to allow the process to go on for selection of a new commission.
Right. And Biketi, at which point do we get to say that, this is a lack of confidence by the public? And at which point do we know whether to draw boundaries with what some are also calling to be a political witch hunt, seeing as there are legal provisions for the reconstitution of the commission? But what we are seeing is what is seemingly a deliberate effort to see that the remaining commissioners resign.
I think as the public, you've got a point that will save you out of that question. There is a public document in the sense of the ruling of the Supreme Court in the last election. And the Supreme Court, you remember the first bungled election, the decision was unanimous, so to speak, that the election was illegal and there were irregularities. To that extent then, and also, we also have a precedent point in view of Akombe's resignation and the other commissioners who've resigned. Now, putting this as a benchmark, that the Supreme Court of the land has said that you conducted an election and the election was illegal and the election had irregularities and you must go back. Looking at that, the commissioners resigning, the public, as at that point, have a point to say you are not fit to conduct this election. Mm-hmm. However, Sharon, we must ask ourselves a critical question. Like Professor has reiterated over and over, that it has become a tradition that we have to go to every election with a new IEBC. They've said it before, that you cannot do things the same way every time and you expect different results. Now, the question that we must ask ourselves as Kenyans, where do we go wrong? Are the laws the problem? Biketi, as I speak today, I will say, I'll give the law a clean bill. It has been tested. In the last election, we saw the Supreme Court put to test the system set. When the IEBC failed to meet the systems, they say the election was bungled. The one thing that I will say confidently today is that this country is in serious shortage of manners. What the layman will call manners, what me as a lawyer and constitutional scholars will call chapter 6, the question of integrity. Integrity is just a complicated way of saying we lack people who have manners. So even as we struggle with the question, who are we going to replace these commissioners with? We must ask ourselves, what test are we going to use to put in place people of character, people that can be trusted? We are going into an election, like I would agree with the senator earlier on, was it Senator Irungu, who said that let us maybe be open and not behave like the proverbial ostrich and bury our heads under the sand and say that we are going to get good people. Maybe we should be clear and say, these two people are acting for this political interest. These others are acting for this political interest. So that as they are there, they must agree in some way to work together. Right. Or else, for me, I do not see a deficiency in the law. I do not see a deficiency in the system. I see a shortage, a deficiency of people that we can trust to hold such offices.
Right, and I want to bring in Prof on that point because it really has come up a lot of times that every other electoral cycle we have to get a new commission for that. And the question that you're raising now is where do we get these people of integrity that Kenyans, will put their trust in to conduct that electoral in a manner that can be trusted and is fair and transparent. So where do we begin, solving this big concern and issue?
I think if you go to the history of elections in this country, the most successful, body that came close to creating a consensus, because sometimes also we get good people, but what lacks is a political consensus. And we saw, for example, the past agreements within the opposition and the ruling party was that could they arrive at a consensus where they can bring in commissioners of high integrity, but at the same time those that do not pander to political interests once they are elected to that body. But what you have seen in the past, and I think this is significant for this country, is that commissioners get into that body, or IBC, or other previous electoral bodies, then they begin to pander to political interests. And sometimes this tends to affect the integrity, understanding, and even trust of Kenyans to the body. What I think needs to be done, and this has occurred elsewhere, is to empower commissioners such as IEBC that once they're in office, that they can remain neutral and that people can believe that they can perform. We've seen electoral commission, for example, in Ghana, and other countries in this African continent, South Africa and so on, which get into office and they serve their full mandate. But the challenge we have, and I think this also speaks to the Wafula Chebukati Commission, is that IEBC got mangled, especially after, like the learned friend there said, the lawyers pointed out very clearly that they were found wanting by the election being annulled. And what you've seen many petitions going through, it means that there's a total indictment of the commission. And it was in the West. The commission will have humbly resigned and told the Kenyan public that we are not able to handle the mandate properly. Right. I will hereby resign. But since we don't want to get Chebukati home without the 5-year contract that he has, as I pointed out earlier, he has a chance, like Isaac Hassan did with his team, to negotiate for an exit strategy that exists with these 2 remaining commissioners, and there's a clean slate. Because if the 3 of them remain and 4 are added to them, there are skeletons in the cupboards. There are skeletons that Kenyans will still say what happened in previous elections, and that how about the accusations by former Commissioner Kombe, how about accusations by Ambassador Dr. Kurgat and others who have pointed out that there are a lot of things at IEBC that are not adding up.
Right.
How about that?
Right.
The reasonable thing will be to have a clean slate for the new commission to have new structures, a new formulated programs and plans to plan for 2022 election. Because without that, if the 3 remain and 4 are added to them, the doubts will still linger. And you don't want doubts to linger on such a very important commission, because IEBC is such a very important organ in this country that the electoral process is very, very important. And we need to review boundaries. We need to reconsider some of the boundaries. We need to plan for 2022 elections that are promising to be full of fireworks like any previous election in this country. Because the elections in this country have high stakes, and it requires a very sober, a very neutral commission to handle them.
Right. And Biketi, there has been this recommendation that, to have the law amended and then enable room for President to appoint a standing selection panel, a selection panel that then could at any given time, kickstart the process of appointing commissioners. What do you think of this recommendation?
Sharon, to be honest, the question of fixing, or rather coming up with laws every other time when an issue arises, is not going to be what will solve our problems. However, that as it may, with all due respect, in view of the handshake, not trying to unravel or rather ripple the waters that are now getting calm, the trust issues in this country, the president gets into office by virtue of a political process. The president is a member of a political party that is being touted, will be filling in a presidential candidate come 2022. So definitely there'll be questions of unrest. There'll be questions where people will not be confident. There'll be questions people will be asking, is this totally beyond reproach in terms of appointing this as permanent select committee? There'll be questions of, does he have any interests to be preserved? The questions will be, there's unintended, or rather there's talk for a referendum to come. There's a question of boundaries to come. In this interim, if the president takes up that particular position, what is going to be the feel of the other side of the divide in terms of politics? So on this question of fixing the IEBC, I think the president should be magnanimous and take an approach that is all-inclusive in view of the spirit of the handshake that he has partaken. On this particular question of the IEBC, he should go ahead and invite other political stakeholders, and they sit and ask themselves, what is the best way of us resolving this question? And for him sticking to the spirit he has set forth when he made his commitment before Parliament, that we will never have an election like the one we've had in the previous years. So on that question, Sharon, for me, I believe it must be an all-inclusive process.
Right, and let me just stay with you, Biketi, just to see what the near future actually looks like, because there are, activities that the Commission really need to embark on, the boundaries issues, the by-elections in Baringo South, in Kisii and Nyamira. And in the event that we say that legally, really, they cannot conduct this, and this can be challenged, by anybody, then how do we move forward? We have commissioners who say they can, conduct this do these activities, and then we have all these other people who have trying to force them to resign. So how do we move forward? If they don't resign, if they don't move out, legally you cannot, what is the legal way forward?
For me, I think we have a constitutional moment. And you know, when there is a lacuna in the law, that is the moment where leadership needs to be exercised. The president needs to swing in because the Constitution also gives him the mandate to ensure that these offices are filled up in view, or rather in following the due process of the law. So in that spirit that the country is in, the healing spirit that the country is in, without faulting, without wavering off the parameters of the law, the president should seize the moment and ensure that we have the other political players come in, because, Sharon, we must, it's a constitution, or rather it's the position of the law, that we must review the boundaries. I think it's every 10 years. We must conduct a census, then we must review the boundaries. As you've correctly put it, we must have these by-elections, because we cannot also sit in that situation forever. So that forces a moment where the president now has to exercise leadership and come walk the talk when he says it's time for us to build a nation. Calling his other colleagues, this could also be another opportunity for the leadership of the country to sit together, not in an exclusive situation where other people feel that they're not being allowed into the, onto the table. So for me, you are right. Those proposals of saying a permanent select committee could be, from where I sit, I'm only a practitioner of the law, they could be worthwhile. But the critical question, inclusivity, is what has been the problem. When people feel they are left out of critical positions, or rather out of critical decisions like the one that we are discussing today.
Right. And Prof, I want to come to you now, even as we get your closing remarks on this. What do you think about that recommendation to have a permanent selection panel, and also what would be then the way forward out of this quagmire? Briefly, yeah.
Thank you, Sharon. I think as a country, we've learned that issues which are dealt with through consensus tend to have more mandate, and I think they tend to succeed more. And I think I agree with the lawyer there, Abdi Guliye, that if you look at the IPPG resolutions that were done in the 90s, just when we were getting out of the kind of domination, once we got into the multi-party dynamics, the IPPG arrived at a consensus that was really appreciated by people on both sides of the political fronts. Right now, like I agree with the lawyer, what he has pointed out, there is the need for consensus, one in which that the selection process is done in a manner that allows all stakeholders to participate and be seen to be represented. Because what has happened in the past is that Kenyans are very good at counting names. They're very good at pointing out when they see any commission appointed. Right. They begin to point out that our stakes are represented. So I think the best way to approach this, like the learned friend has pointed out, is that can we begin to look at ways of creating consensus in terms of how IEBC commissioners are selected. Right. And that the selection process is above board, that in one which everybody can believe. Right. And that everybody feels that the process is open and fair, because the issue is it open and fair? Right. That is everybody be given a fair chance to be represented on it and so on. If that is arrived at, in a manner, whatever manner is arrived at, it will be seen to be respected. We saw this happen at the IPPG constituted a commission, and it conducted 2 elections, and people believed in it. Right. So if you can get back to that and get the drawing board to allow consensus, I think that's a way to go. Okay, thank you, Prof. That is a good place to wind up the discussion tonight. I want to thank you both gentlemen, Professor Maurice Amutabi and lawyer Nick Biketi, for joining me for this conversation tonight. And that's where